The silence of space was something Casey Morgan had grown used to over the past 2 years. She sat at her monitoring station on the edge of human territory, watching screens that rarely showed anything interesting. Most days were the same. She would scan frequencies, log cosmic noise, and count the hours until her shift ended. Today felt no different as she sipped her coffee and adjusted the signal filters. Then something changed. A new signal cut through the static, weak but definitely artificial. Casey sat up straight, her tiredness vanishing instantly. She isolated the frequency and ran it through the translation computer. The patterns were unlike anything in the human database. Her hands moved quickly across the controls, strengthening the signal and clearing away the interference. The message began to take shape. Casey felt her stomach twist as the words became clear. It was a distress call. Someone out there was dying and they were screaming for help across the void of space. She listened as the translated message played through her speakers. The voice belonged to a species called the Varen. Their world was burning. Cities were being destroyed from orbit. Millions were already dead. Casey's fingers shook slightly as she recorded everything. The message described the attackers as the Krell Dominion, an empire that treated other species like animals to be caged or harvested. The Varen had tried to surrender, tried to negotiate, tried everything. The Krell did not care. They wanted the planet and its resources. The people living there were just obstacles to be removed. Images came through with the signal. Casey wished they hadn't. She saw cities that looked beautiful even in ruins. She saw crowds of civilians running from explosions. She saw children separated from their parents, loaded onto transport ships like cargo. Her training told her to stay professional, to just forward the data and let others make decisions. But Casey was human, and humans had limits to what they could ignore. She sent the signal up the chain of command with a priority alert. Then she sent it again to make sure it went through. Within minutes, her communication panel lit up with responses. Someone important had seen the message. Within an hour, she received orders to maintain the signal lock and prepare a full report. Casey worked through the rest of her shift without taking a break, gathering every piece of data the Viren transmission contained. 3,000 light-years away, Admiral Victor Kane sat in his office at Earth Command headquarters. He was reviewing supply reports when the priority message arrived. Kane had commanded fleets for 20 years. He had fought in the Unification Wars when Earth's nations finally stopped fighting each other and looked outward. He thought he had seen everything war could offer. The Varan message proved him wrong. Kane watched the attached video files 3 times, each time his jaw clenched tighter. He called his senior staff for an emergency meeting. Commander Lisa Hayes arrived first, followed by Captain Greg Palmer and 6 other high-ranking officers. Kane played the Varan distress call for all of them. The room fell silent as the message ended. Captain Palmer spoke first, his voice careful and measured. Earth had a strict policy about alien conflicts. Humanity had learned the galaxy was dangerous. There were empires out there with weapons that could crack planets. Getting involved in their wars seemed like suicide. Earth survived by being cautious, by building strength quietly, by avoiding attention. Helping the Varan would announce humanity's presence to every hostile power in the galaxy. Commander Hayes disagreed. She pointed out that the Krell clearly saw peaceful species as prey. If humanity did nothing, they would be showing the galaxy that humans were just another species that looked away when innocents died. Worse, it would show humanity was afraid. Fear invited aggression. Strength and conviction deterred it. The debate went on for hours. Some officers worried about Earth's safety. Others argued about resources and strategic position. Kane listened to all of them, but his mind was already made up. He had made his decision the moment he saw those Varan children being herded onto ships. There were some things worth fighting for, even against impossible odds. When the arguments finally died down, Kane stood. His voice was quiet but absolutely firm. Earth would respond. Humanity would not stand by and watch genocide happen when they had the power to stop it. This was not about politics or strategy. This was about who humans were as a species. If they ignored this cry for help, they did not deserve to call themselves civilized. The orders went out within the hour. Every combat-ready ship in the Earth fleet received mobilization orders. Captains were pulled from leave. Crews were assembled. Supply officers worked around the clock. The entire military machine of humanity began to move with a single purpose. They were going to war against an enemy they had never met, to save people they had never seen, on a world they had never heard of until today. On Mars, Captain Jake Sullivan read his orders aboard the heavy cruiser Valiant. He was a practical man who preferred clear missions with achievable goals. This mission was anything but clear. Fight an unknown enemy in an unknown system to save an unknown species. The strategic analysts would call it madness. Jake called his senior officers to the bridge and explained the situation. He expected doubt or questions. Instead, his crew responded with grim determination. News of the mobilization spread through human space like wildfire. The public response surprised even Admiral Kane. There was no debate, no protest, no calls for caution. Recruitment centers were flooded with volunteers. Factories increased production. Everyone wanted to help. The images from the Varan distress call had been broadcast on every network. Humanity saw what was happening and united in rage. Dr. Helen Cross volunteered to join the fleet as a civilian advisor. She was Earth's leading expert on alien biology and culture. Helen had spent her career studying the few species humanity had peaceful contact with. She believed intelligent life was precious regardless of what form it took. The Varan needed someone who understood their psychology and culture. Helen packed her research and boarded a transport to join Admiral Kane's flagship. Within 3 days, the fleet was assembled at Staging Point Sigma. 52 warships, the largest military force Earth had ever gathered in one place. They were not the biggest ships in the galaxy, not the most advanced, not the most powerful, but they were crewed by humans who had decided that some things were worth dying for. The Varan distress call had awakened something primal in humanity, something that had driven humans to fight impossible odds throughout their history. Admiral Kane stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Defiance. Around him, officers worked at their stations preparing for the jump to hyperspace. Kane thought about his own family back on Earth. He had a daughter about the same age as some of those Varan children in the video. That made this personal in a way no military briefing ever could. The final checks were completed. Every ship reported ready. Kane gave the order. The fleet vanished into hyperspace bound for a world called Varus Prime. They were going to show the Krell Dominion what happened when you made humanity angry. They were going to teach the galaxy that genocide had consequences. Most importantly, they were going to answer a distress call that no one else had the courage to answer. In Krell space, Warlord Thraken reviewed reports of the Varan conquest with satisfaction. The operation had gone perfectly. Minimal resistance, maximum resource capture. The Varan survivors would serve the Dominion as workers. Their technology would be studied and absorbed. Their world would produce food and materials for the Empire. It was just another successful harvest in the long history of Krell expansion. Thraken had never heard of humans. Within days, his entire universe would change. The journey through hyperspace took 6 days. Captain Jake Sullivan used every hour to prepare his crew. The Valiant was a heavy cruiser built in the Mars shipyards, designed for extended combat operations. She carried a crew of 300, and every single one of them knew they might not come home. Jake made sure they understood what they were fighting for. This was not about territory or resources. This was about stopping monsters. Jake walked through the ship during the quiet hours talking to his people. He found young officers checking weapon systems and old veterans writing letters home. Everyone dealt with pre-battle stress differently. Some joked and laughed. Others went silent and focused. Jake had learned long ago not to judge how people prepared for combat. What mattered was how they performed when the shooting started. In the hangar bay, Marines checked their equipment for the 100th time. Colonel Amy Fisher moved among them, offering quiet words of encouragement. Fisher had earned her rank in brutal close-quarters fighting during the Titan Rebellion. She was tough as steel and twice as sharp. Her Marines would be the first boots on the ground if the mission required a planetary assault. Fisher made sure every single one of them could handle their weapons in their sleep. Private Danny Scott was checking his rifle when Colonel Fisher stopped beside him. Danny was 19 years old, and this would be his first real combat. He tried not to show his fear, but Fisher saw it anyway. She told him fear was natural. Fear kept you alert and alive. The trick was not letting fear control you. Danny nodded and went back to his equipment check with slightly steadier hands. On the Defiance, Admiral Kane met with his intelligence officer, Commander Paul Grant. Grant had spent the past 6 days analyzing everything known about the Krell Dominion. The data was limited but concerning. The Krell had conquered dozens of species over 3 centuries. They were technologically advanced and militarily powerful, Their tactics favored overwhelming force and systematic destruction of resistance. Grant explained that the Krell had never faced an opponent quite like humanity. Most species in the galaxy had evolved on peaceful worlds with abundant resources. They developed slowly, learning cooperation before competition. Humans were different. Earth was a difficult world that produced difficult survivors. Humanity learned to fight before they learned to fly. That fundamental difference might give them an edge. Kane listened carefully and asked about Krell weaknesses. Grant admitted there were not many obvious ones. The Krell were physically powerful, well-armed, and confident in their superiority. However, that confidence might be their greatest weakness. The Krell expected other species to surrender or die. They had never encountered an enemy that refused to do either. Dr. Helen Cross spent the journey studying what little information existed about the Varan species. They were humanoid but smaller than humans with pale blue skin and large eyes. The Varan had been a spacefaring civilization for over 500 years, but had remained in their home system. They were peaceful by nature, having eliminated war from their culture centuries ago. That pacifism had left them defenseless when the Krell arrived. Helen worried about how the Varan would react to human methods. Humanity's approach to warfare was brutal and direct. Humans believed in overwhelming violence applied with precision. The Varan might be shocked by the same tactics that would save them. Helen prepared psychological profiles and cultural briefings, hoping to bridge the gap between two very different species. As the fleet approached Vera's system, tension rose on every ship. Sensor operators watched their screens with intense focus. Weapons crews ran final checks. Medical teams prepared surgical bays. Everyone had a job to do and everyone understood the stakes. This was not a training exercise. This was real combat against a real enemy. Commander Lisa Hayes coordinated the fleet's battle plan from the Defiance's Combat Information Center. The plan was simple in concept but difficult in execution. The fleet would emerge from hyperspace already in battle formation. They would immediately engage any Krell ships in orbit, while Marines prepared to drop to the surface. Speed and aggression would be their primary weapons. The Krell would not have time to organize a proper defense. Hayes had studied human naval history extensively. She understood that surprise could overcome superior numbers. The key was hitting hard and fast, not giving the enemy time to recover or adapt. Every ship captain in the fleet had been briefed on their specific role. They would fight as a coordinated unit, each vessel supporting the others. Jake Sullivan stood on the Valiant's bridge as the countdown to system entry began. His executive officer, Commander Linda Martinez, called out status reports. All systems were green. All weapons were armed. All personnel were at battle stations. Jake felt the familiar pre-combat focus narrow his attention. Everything except the mission faded away. There was only the ship, the crew, and the enemy they were about to face. The final seconds counted down. Admiral Kane's voice came through on the fleet-wide channel. His message was brief. They were going into battle against evil. They would fight with honor but without mercy. The Varan were counting on them. Earth was counting on them. Humanity's future might depend on what happened in the next few hours. Kane's voice was steady and confident. His calm helped settle nerves throughout the fleet. The fleet dropped out of hyperspace right on target. Ferris Prime appeared on the screens, a beautiful blue and green world marred by fires visible even from orbit. 8 Krell warships hung in space around the planet, massive vessels bristling with weapons. On the surface, sensors detected ongoing combat operations and civilian evacuation points. The Krell detected the human fleet immediately. Their ships began to turn, bringing weapons to bear. But they were too slow. Human doctrine emphasized the first strike, and humanity had perfected the art of the ambush. The Valiant and her sister ships opened fire before the Krell could even raise full shields. Jake watched his main guns fire, massive railguns accelerating solid projectiles to incredible speeds. The rounds crossed the distance in seconds and slammed into the nearest Krell warship. The impact was devastating. The Krell ship's shields flickered and failed. Hull plating shattered. Atmosphere vented into space. Secondary explosions rippled along the vessel's length as power systems overloaded. The Krell had been expecting energy weapons like most species used. They were not prepared for kinetic bombardment. Their shields, designed to deflect lasers and plasma, did almost nothing against solid metal, traveling at a significant fraction of light speed. The first Krell warship died before it could fire a single shot. Across the battle space, similar scenes played out. Human ships moved with practiced precision, their captains working together like instruments in an orchestra of destruction. The Krell tried to respond, but their coordination was breaking down. They had never faced an enemy this aggressive, this willing to close to point-blank range and trade fire. Admiral Kane watched the battle unfold with grim satisfaction. The plan was working. The Krell were reacting instead of acting, always a dangerous position in combat. Kane ordered the second wave forward, fresh ships moving up to replace vessels that had taken damage. The human fleet was smaller than the Krell force, but they fought smarter and harder. Commander Hayes tracked every ship on both sides, making constant adjustments to the battle plan. When one human vessel took heavy damage, she immediately redirected others to cover its withdrawal. When a gap opened in the Krell formation, she sent ships through to exploit it. Combat was chaos, but Hayes brought order to that chaos through constant attention and quick decisions. The Krell flagship, Conqueror's Blade, tried to rally its fleet. The massive ship was twice the size of any human vessel. Its weapons could destroy a smaller ship with a single hit. But size meant less when you could not bring weapons to bear effectively. Human ships swarmed around the flagship like angry hornets, hitting it from multiple angles, never staying still long enough for the Krell to target them properly. Jake ordered the Valiant in close to the Krell flagship. His weapons officer protested that they would be in range of all the enemy's guns. Jake acknowledged the risk and gave the order again. Sometimes you had to accept danger to achieve victory. The Valiant dove in, her armor absorbing several hits as she closed to knife-fighting range. Then the Valiant's full arsenal opened up at almost point-blank distance. The Krell flagship shuddered under the assault. Its shields collapsed completely. Armor that had seemed impenetrable cracked and split. The Valiant pulled away, trailing smoke from a dozen wounds, but the damage she had inflicted was far worse. The Krell flagship was dying, and everyone in the battle space knew it. 30 minutes after the battle began, 5 Krell warships were destroyed or disabled. The remaining 3 tried to retreat, but Admiral Kane had positioned ships to block their escape. There would be no survivors to report back to the Krell Dominion. Not yet. Humanity wanted this victory to be complete and absolute. They wanted to send a message that could not be ignored. The last Krell ship died fighting, its crew refusing to surrender even when defeat was certain. Jake respected that courage even as he gave the order to finish them. Warriors recognized warriors even across species barriers. The Krell were monsters, but they were brave monsters. The first drop pods hit atmosphere over Varen Prime, just as the sun rose over the capital city. Colonel Amy Fisher rode in the lead pod, her Marines packed in tight around her. The descent was violent, the pod shaking and rattling as it burned through the sky. Amy had made dozens of combat drops before, but they never got easier. There was something primal about falling toward a hostile planet, knowing that people down there wanted to kill you. The pods landed in the middle of the city with thunderous impacts. Hatches blew open and Marines poured out, weapons ready. Amy took in the scene in seconds. The city was a nightmare. Buildings were collapsed or burning. Streets were littered with debris and bodies. In the distance, she could hear weapons fire and screams. The Krell were still hunting survivors. Private Danny Scott stumbled out of his pod and immediately threw up. The smell hit him first, smoke and death mixed together. Then the sounds, crying and shouting in languages he did not understand. His sergeant grabbed his shoulder and steadied him. There was no time for shock. People needed help right now. Danny wiped his mouth, raised his rifle, and followed his squad into the ruins. The Marines moved through the city in coordinated teams. They had trained for urban combat extensively, but training never fully prepared anyone for the reality. Every corner could hide an enemy.
Every building could be a trap.
The Marines advanced slowly and carefully, clearing each structure before moving to the next. They found Varen civilians hiding in basements and rubble. Most were injured or traumatized. Some did not even understand that rescue had arrived. Sergeant Kyle Brooks led his squad toward a large building that sensors indicated held a concentration of life signs. As they approached, Krell soldiers emerged from the entrance. The aliens were large, over 2 meters tall, with reptilian features and powered armor. They carried weapons that looked like heavy plasma rifles. For a moment, both groups stared at each other in surprise. Kyle fired first. His squad opened up a heartbeat later. The firefight was brief and brutal. Human assault rifles spat armor-piercing rounds that punched through Krell armor like paper. The aliens were tough and well-trained, but they had never faced an enemy this aggressive. Within seconds, all 6 Krell soldiers were down. Kyle ordered his squad forward. The building needed to be cleared. Inside, they found over 200 Viren civilians packed into what looked like a makeshift prison. The aliens were terrified, pressing back against the walls when the armed humans entered. Kyle lowered his weapon and tried to project calm. He did not speak their language, but fear was universal. He pointed to himself, then to the door, then made gestures of protection. Slowly, the Viren began to understand. These strange beings were here to help. Across the city, similar scenes played out. Human Marines fought Krell soldiers in close-quarters combat. The fighting was savage. The Krell were physically stronger than humans, their armor more advanced. But humans had something the Krell did not expect. Humans fought with a desperation born from knowing what happened to the defenseless. Every Marine had seen the videos from the distress call. They knew what the Krell did to civilians. That knowledge made them relentless. Lieutenant Kate Morrison led her platoon toward the central plaza, where sensors showed a large Krell concentration. Her orders were to break up the formation and rescue any civilians being held there. As her troops approached, they saw the situation was worse than expected. Hundreds of Viren were being herded onto transport shuttles. Krell soldiers were using shock weapons on anyone who resisted. Children were being separated from parents. It was systematic, efficient evil. Kate did not hesitate. She ordered her platoon to attack immediately. Surprise was their only advantage against such numbers. The Marines opened fire from multiple positions, catching the Krell in a crossfire. Shock weapons were dropped as Krell soldiers scrambled for their rifles. But the Marines had already killed a dozen of them before the Krell could organize a defense. The plaza turned into a killing ground. Krell soldiers took cover behind their shuttles and returned fire. Their plasma weapons burned through concrete and metal. 2 Marines went down in the first volley. Kate pulled them to cover and called for medical support. Then she led a flanking attack around the plaza's edge. Her troops moved from building to building, always firing, always advancing. The Krell fought hard, but human tactics were overwhelming them. Private Danny Scott found himself face-to-face with a Krell soldier in a narrow alley. The alien was wounded but still dangerous. Danny's rifle jammed at the worst possible moment. The Krell raised his weapon. Time seemed to slow down. Danny reacted on pure instinct, charging forward and tackling the much larger alien. They went down together, fighting hand to hand. Danny was smaller and weaker, but he was also more desperate. He found his combat knife and used it. The Krell stopped moving. Danny stood up shaking. He had killed someone in close combat. His sergeant found him a moment later and pulled him back to the squad. There was no time to process what happened. The fight was still going on. Danny reloaded his rifle and kept moving. He would deal with his feelings later, if there was a later. Colonel Fisher coordinated the ground assault from a mobile command post. Reports came in from across the city. The Marines were winning, but at a cost.
Casualties were mounting.
Medical teams worked frantically to save wounded soldiers. Fisher made the hard decisions, sending units where they were needed most, even when it meant pulling them from positions they had fought hard to secure. Urban combat was always brutal, always chaotic. This was worse because civilian lives hung in the balance. The Krell ground commander, Field Master Krath, watched his forces collapse with growing disbelief. These humans fought like nothing he had encountered in 30 years of military service. They should have been cautious, preserving their forces. Instead, they attacked everywhere at once, trading casualties for speed. Krath tried to consolidate his remaining troops, but the humans would not give him time. Every time he established a defensive position, they found a way around or through it. Krath contacted his orbital support for evacuation, only to learn that the fleet was destroyed. His troops were stranded on the planet with no hope of rescue. The realization was devastating. The Krell Dominion did not lose battles. They crushed opposition with overwhelming force. Yet here they were, being destroyed by a species they had never even heard of yesterday. By mid-afternoon, the battle was turning decisively in humanity's favor. Krell resistance was breaking down. Some units tried to surrender. Others fought to the death. Colonel Fisher issued clear orders. Surrender would be accepted. But any Krell soldier who harmed another civilian would be executed on the spot. There would be no mercy for those who continued to hunt the defenseless. Lieutenant Kate Morrison's platoon finally cleared the central plaza. The Viren civilians they rescued were in bad shape, many injured and all traumatized. Human medical teams arrived quickly, treating aliens and humans side by side. The Varen watched these strange warriors with confusion and hope. They had sent a distress call, not expecting anyone to answer. These humans had crossed the galaxy to save them. Dr. Helen Cross arrived on the surface as the fighting wound down. She had been orbiting in a medical ship, waiting for the combat zone to be secure enough for civilian personnel. Helen moved through the rescued Varen, offering what comfort she could. She had translation software that allowed basic communication. The stories she heard broke her heart. Families destroyed, friends killed, a peaceful civilization subjected to systematic brutality. But she also saw hope. The Varen were beginning to understand they had been saved. One Varen male approached Helen carefully. His name, translated, was Tellan. He had lost his wife and children in the first day of the attack. Tellan had been ready to die. The arrival of the humans confused him. Why would another species risk their lives for strangers? Helen tried to explain that humans believed some things were more important than safety. Innocent lives mattered. Genocide was unacceptable. Tellan listened and wept. They were tears of grief mixed with gratitude. As night fell over the capital city, the battle was effectively over. Krell resistance had collapsed completely. Some alien soldiers were prisoners. Most were dead. The humans had taken casualties too. 37 Marines killed, over 100 wounded. For some families back on Earth, the victory would come with unbearable cost. But thousands of Varen lives had been saved. The capital city was secure. Captain Jake Sullivan brought the Valiant into low orbit to provide fire support if needed. From space, he could see fires still burning across the planet, but they were being contained. Rescue operations were underway in multiple cities. The worst was over, but the healing would take years. Jake thought about the price of victory. His ship had taken damage. Good sailors had died at their posts. But looking at the planet below, Jake knew it was worth it. Sometimes the price had to be paid. Admiral Kane received reports from across the Vera system. The military operation was a complete success. All Krell forces were destroyed or captured. Varen casualties were horrific, but would have been total genocide without intervention. Human casualties were acceptable by military standards, though every loss hurt. Kane knew this victory would echo across the galaxy. Humanity had just announced its presence in the Yei. 3 weeks after the liberation of Varus Prime, the news finally reached the Krell homeworld. The journey took time because communications in the galaxy were limited by the speed of light and relay stations. When the message arrived at Krell Prime, it caused something the Dominion had not experienced in over a century. Fear. Supreme Overlord Vrakash sat in his throne room when the report came through. He was ancient by Krell standards, over 200 years old. Vrakash had built the Dominion through ruthless expansion and systematic conquest. He had crushed rebellions and destroyed entire species that resisted. The concept of defeat was foreign to him. Yet here was a report of a complete battle group destroyed by an unknown species called humans. Warlord Thraken stood before the throne, waiting for judgment. He had authorized the Varus Prime operation. His forces had been annihilated. Thraken expected execution, but Vrakash was too cunning to kill useful subordinates in anger. Instead, the Overlord demanded answers. Who were these humans? How did they fight? What made them so effective? Thraken explained what little intelligence had been gathered before the fleet was destroyed. The humans used kinetic weapons instead of energy-based ones. Their tactics were aggressively unpredictable. Most importantly, they seemed to lack any sense of self-preservation. They fought like warriors defending their own homes, yet Varus Prime meant nothing to them. They were strangers fighting for strangers. This behavior was irrational by Krell standards. Vrakash listened carefully. He had not lived 2 centuries by underestimating enemies. These humans had achieved something remarkable. They had defeated Krell forces in open combat. That had not happened in living memory. The Overlord gave orders. Find the human homeworld. Assemble the Grand Fleet. Make an example of this entire species. The galaxy needed to remember what happened to those who defied the Dominion. Meanwhile, on Varus Prime, Colonel Amy Fisher worked to establish a permanent military presence. Her Marines were building defensive positions around population centers. Human engineers helped repair critical infrastructure. Medical teams treated thousands of injured Varen. The work was endless but necessary. The Varen were grateful but still traumatized. They moved through their damaged cities like ghosts, trying to rebuild lives that had been shattered. Fisher also began training Varen volunteers in combat techniques. It felt strange teaching warfare to a species that had eliminated violence from their culture centuries ago, but the Varen leadership understood reality now. Pacifism only worked when everyone agreed to it. The Krell did not agree. If the Varen wanted to survive future threats, they needed to learn how to fight. One of Fisher's students was Tellin, the Varen male who had lost his family. He struggled with the training at first. Every time he held a weapon, his entire cultural conditioning rebelled. Violence was wrong. Killing was wrong. Fisher understood his conflict. She sat with him after a difficult training session and explained her philosophy. Fighting was not about hatred or revenge. It was about protecting those who could not protect themselves. Tellin thought about this for a long time. Finally, he picked up his rifle and asked Fisher to show him again. Dr. Helen Cross spent her time building relationships between humans and Varen. The two species were more similar than different. Both valued family, both created art and music, both wondered about their place in the universe, but they had developed along very different paths. The Varen had achieved peace through philosophy and reason. Humans had achieved it through exhaustion after countless wars. Understanding these differences was crucial for building lasting friendship. Helen also studied Krell prisoners taken during the battle. The aliens were remarkably uniform in their thinking. They truly believed might made right. The strong ruled, the weak served. There was no morality beyond power. Helen found this worldview disturbing but enlightening. The Krell were not monsters in their own minds. They were predators following their nature. That made them predictable, which might be useful in future conflicts. Admiral Kane remained in the Varus system, coordinating with Earth Command. The victory had been sweet, but Kane knew retaliation was coming. He pushed for increased military production back home. More ships, more weapons, more trained personnel. Earth needed to prepare for war on a scale humans had never fought before. The Krell dominion was vast, and they would not tolerate this insult. Commander Paul Grant continued analyzing captured Krell technology and databases. What he discovered was sobering. The Dominion controlled over 100 star systems. They had a standing military of millions. Their industrial capacity dwarfed Earth's by several orders of magnitude. In a straight fight, humanity could not win. Grant's reports made that clear. But Grant also noted something interesting. The Krell had never faced sustained guerrilla warfare. All their conquests followed the same pattern. Overwhelming force, quick victory, occupation. They did not know how to fight an enemy that refused to be conquered. Grant proposed a new strategy to Admiral Kane. Instead of defending human space and waiting for the Krell to come, humanity should take the offensive. Raid Krell supply lines. Hit their industrial targets. Free their conquered species. Make the Dominion bleed resources across their entire territory. Force them to defend everywhere, which meant they could not concentrate forces anywhere. It was risky, but Kane saw the wisdom. Earth needed time to build strength. Offensive operations would buy that time. Captain Jake Sullivan received new orders 2 weeks after the battle. His ship, the Valiant, was to lead a raiding force deep into Krell territory. The mission was simple in concept but dangerous in execution. Find Krell supply depots and destroy them. Avoid major fleet concentrations. Hit and run, never staying to fight a pitched battle. Sullivan assembled his captains and explained the plan. They would be operating far from support, deep in enemy space. Some ships might not come back. But the mission was critical. The raiding force departed Varus Prime quietly, slipping away during a shift change. They consisted of 5 fast cruisers, each heavily armed and equipped with the best stealth technology humanity possessed. Sullivan plotted a course to the Corvin system, where Krell intelligence indicated a major supply depot. The journey would take a week through hyperspace. Sullivan used the time to drill his crew relentlessly. Speed and precision would be essential. Any mistake could be fatal. Back on Earth, the public response to the Varus Prime victory was overwhelming. Humanity had proven they could stand against galactic threats. Recruitment continued to surge. Shipyards worked around the clock. Scientists developed new weapons based on what they learned from the battle. The entire species mobilized like never before. For the first time in human history, Earth was truly united by a common cause. But not everyone celebrated. Some voices warned that humanity was inviting destruction. The Krell were too powerful to defeat. Better to hide and hope they never found Earth. These voices were drowned out by the majority, but they raised valid concerns. Was humanity's pride leading them to extinction? Admiral Kane struggled with these questions in private moments. He had started this war by choosing to answer the Varan distress call. Every human death from this point forward would be partially his responsibility. The weight of that knowledge was crushing, but Kane also knew that some decisions transcended personal comfort. Humanity had chosen to stand for something. If they backed down now, they would lose more than the war. They would lose their soul. On Krell Prime, Supreme Overlord Vrakash received intelligence reports about Earth's location. His agents had traced human communications back to the Sol system. Vrakash smiled, a terrifying expression on his reptilian features. Now he knew where to strike. He ordered the Grand Fleet assembled. 200 warships, the largest military force the Dominion had ever gathered. They would jump to Earth, destroy its defenses, and subjugate the entire human species. The survivors would learn what happened to those who defied the Krell. The order went through Dominion space like a shockwave. Warships from dozens of systems began converging on Krell Prime. Supply ships hauled ammunition and fuel. Troop transports loaded soldiers. The military machine of the Dominion had awakened, and it was focused on a single target. Earth would burn. News of the Krell mobilization reached Admiral Kane through spy networks and intercepted communications. The timeline was short. The Grand Fleet would be ready in about 6 weeks. Then it would take them 2 weeks to reach Earth. Humanity had less than 2 months to prepare for the largest battle in their history. Kane immediately recalled all military forces to Sol system. This would be the decisive engagement. Everything depended on holding Earth. Captain Sullivan's raiding force hit the Corvin supply depot before news of the Grand Fleet reached them. The attack went perfectly. They emerged from hyperspace, destroyed the depot in minutes, and vanished before Krell reinforcements arrived. Sullivan felt satisfaction at the mission's success, but it was tempered by new orders that came through immediately after. Return to Earth. All ships needed for system defense. The big battle was coming. Colonel Fisher received similar orders. Begin preparing Varan forces for independent operations. Human Marines would be needed at Earth. Fisher worked frantically to accelerate the training program. The Varan were learning quickly, but they were not ready. The defense of Earth began long before the Krell fleet arrived. Every asteroid in the belt was surveyed and fortified. Some became weapons platforms armed with railguns and missile batteries. Others were hollowed out and filled with mines that could be released at command. The asteroid belt would be the first line of defense, a deadly maze that any approaching fleet would have to navigate. Mars became an armed fortress. Its orbital platforms were upgraded with the most powerful weapons humanity could build. Surface installations were hardened against bombardment. Millions of volunteers dug shelters deep underground. If the Krell broke through, Mars would fight street by street, tunnel by tunnel. The red planet would not fall easily. Luna followed the same pattern. The moon's lower gravity made it perfect for mass drivers, electromagnetic catapults that could throw projectiles at incredible speeds. Engineers worked around the clock installing these weapons. Luna had been humanity's first permanent settlement beyond Earth. It would be defended with everything available. Earth itself became the heart of the defensive network. Orbital platforms surrounded the planet in multiple layers. Each platform carried enough firepower to destroy a capital ship. Ground-based installations added their weapons to the mix. If the Krell wanted Earth, they would have to wade through a storm of fire unlike anything seen in galactic history. Admiral Kane established his command center deep beneath Geneva. From here, he could coordinate every ship, every platform, every weapon in the Sol system. Commander Lisa Hayes worked beside him, managing the endless details of fleet coordination. Commander Paul Grant analyzed intelligence and predicted Krell movements. They worked 18-hour days, surviving on coffee and determination. Captain Jake Sullivan brought the Valiant home to find Earth transformed. The planet he had left 2 months ago was recognizable but different. Fear and resolve had changed humanity. People no longer worried about small problems. There were no petty arguments, no pointless conflicts. Everyone focused on survival. Sullivan found it strangely beautiful, this unity born from existential threat. Colonel Fisher deployed her Marines throughout the Sol system. Companies were assigned to every major platform and installation. If Krell soldiers managed to board, they would find human Marines waiting. Fisher had learned valuable lessons from the Varys Prime fighting. She shared these lessons in briefings and training sessions. The Krell were tough but not invincible. Aim for joints in their armor. Use grenades in confined spaces. Never let them use their superior strength in close combat. Private Danny Scott had changed since Varus Prime. He was quieter now, more focused. The kid who had thrown up at his first combat drop was gone, replaced by a hardened warrior. Danny checked his equipment obsessively, making sure everything was perfect. He wrote letters home that he might never send. Like everyone else, Danny understood the odds, but he also understood the stakes. His family was on Earth. His friends, his life, everything he cared about. He would die to protect it if necessary. The Viren sent 20 ships to help defend Earth. It was a token force compared to the Krell fleet, but the symbolism mattered. The Viren were repaying the debt of their rescue. The ships arrived led by Tellan, who had risen quickly through the new Viran military. Tellan and his crews were still learning combat operations, but they were brave and determined. Their presence reminded humanity they were not fighting alone. Other species noticed the gathering storm. The Lyrian Confederation sent representatives to speak with Admiral Kane. They offered ships and supplies. The Lyrians had paid tribute to the Krell for generations. They wanted to see the Dominion challenged. Kane accepted their help gratefully. 30 Lyrian vessels joined the defense fleet. It still was not enough to match Krell numbers, but every ship helped. 2 weeks before the expected Krell arrival, long-range scouts detected the Grand Fleet's approach. The reports were sobering. 200 Krell warships moving in perfect formation. Their fleet included vessels ranging from fast destroyers to massive dreadnoughts. The flagship, Infinite Dominion, was twice the size of any human ship. Its weapons could crack a planet's crust. Its shields could withstand sustained bombardment. Supreme Overlord Vrakash commanded from the Infinite Dominion's bridge. He reviewed intelligence on the human home system with satisfaction. The defenders had approximately 80 combat-capable ships, plus various platforms and installations. Impressive for a young species, but hopelessly outnumbered, Vrakash planned to crush Earth's fleet, then bombard the planet until humanity surrendered unconditionally. The survivors would serve the Dominion as laborers. Their technology would be absorbed. Their defiance would be forgotten. Admiral Kane held a final briefing for all ship captains and installation commanders. The meeting was conducted by hologram, allowing hundreds of officers to participate simultaneously. Kane's message was simple. The Krell expected a traditional battle. They would attack in formation, using superior numbers to overwhelm defenders. Humanity would not accommodate them. Human forces would fight asymmetrically, using the terrain to their advantage, never presenting a unified target. The plan had 3 phases. First, the Krell would be funneled through the asteroid belt, where mines and ambush positions would inflict maximum casualties. Second, the main human fleet would engage in hit-and-run attacks, preventing the Krell from concentrating their forces. Third, if the Krell reached Earth's orbit, every weapon on the planet would open fire simultaneously. It was not a plan that guaranteed victory, but it gave humanity a fighting chance. Captain Sullivan listened to the briefing and understood his role. The Valiant would be part of the ambush force in the asteroid belt. They would strike hard, then retreat to prepared positions. Sullivan thought about his family on Earth. He had a sister in Boston, parents in Seattle. If the defense failed, they would face Krell occupation or worse. That thought made his resolve iron-hard. The Krell would not pass while he lived. The day of battle arrived with terrible inevitability. Long-range sensors detected the Krell fleet at the edge of the Sol system. They paused there, conducting final scans. Vrakash wanted to understand the defensive layout before committing his forces. His tactical officers provided analysis. The humans had fortified intelligently, but there were only so many places to put defenses. The path to Earth was clear enough. The Krell fleet advanced into the asteroid belt in 3 waves. The first wave consisted of smaller, faster ships meant to draw out defenders and identify threats. The second wave was heavy cruisers and battleships, the main striking power. The third wave held the Infinite Dominion and support vessels. It was a textbook approach to system assault. Vrakash had used similar tactics dozens of times. They always worked. The first wave penetrated deep into the asteroid belt before the ambush triggered. What appeared to be ordinary asteroids suddenly activated, revealing hidden weapons platforms. Mines that had been dormant began moving on automated courses toward Krell ships. And from concealed positions behind larger asteroids, human warships opened fire at point-blank range. The Krell first wave disintegrated in minutes. Commanders who had felt confident suddenly faced threats from every direction. Railgun rounds punched through shields and hulls. Missiles came from unexpected angles. Krell ships tried to return fire, but could not identify targets quickly enough. The asteroids themselves became weapons as human ships pushed them into collision courses with enemy vessels. Captain Sullivan watched the carnage with grim satisfaction. The Valiant had destroyed 2 Krell destroyers already. His crew worked with machine efficiency, loading, firing, moving to new positions. They followed the doctrine perfectly. Never stay still. Never fight fair, always stack advantages. Sullivan ordered the Valiant deeper into the asteroid field, searching for new targets. The Krell second wave adapted to the new threat. They advanced more cautiously, scanning every asteroid before passing. They found and destroyed several weapons platforms. Their superior numbers began to tell. Human ships were forced to retreat from positions that became too exposed, but the retreat was orderly, falling back to secondary ambush points. Every kilometer the Krell advanced cost them ships and time. Admiral Kane monitored the battle from his command center. The first phase was working better than expected. The Krell had lost nearly 40 ships in the asteroid belt, but they were still coming, still overwhelmingly powerful. Kane gave orders for the second phase to begin. The main human fleet hidden behind Mars would now engage. Commander Lisa Hayes coordinated the fleet's movement with precision. Ships emerged from Mars' shadow in perfect formation, accelerating toward the Krell second wave's flank. The timing was critical. They needed to hit hard and disengage before the third wave could respond. The human fleet opened fire at maximum range, then immediately began evasive maneuvers. The Krell's second wave turned to face this new threat, which was exactly what Kane wanted. While they focused on the human fleet, the weapons platforms on Mars opened fire. Massive railguns and missile batteries launched their payloads. The Krell suddenly faced attack from 2 directions. Their formation began to break apart as individual ships tried to defend themselves. But Supreme Overlord Vrakash was not a fool who had ruled for 2 centuries by being reckless. He saw the human. Every weapon on Earth fired simultaneously. Thousands of railguns, missile batteries, laser arrays, and experimental weapons unleashed hell toward the approaching Krell fleet. The planet itself became a fortress bristling with firepower. From the surface, it looked like the sky was burning. The atmosphere glowed from the sheer energy being released. This was humanity's last stand, and they held nothing back. Supreme Overlord Vrakash watched his fleet die with growing disbelief. His tactical screens showed ship after ship winking out of existence. The defensive fire from Earth was beyond anything in Krell experience. These humans had turned their entire world into a weapon. Vrakash had seen fortified planets before, but nothing like this. The intensity of fire was unsustainable. Surely the humans would run out of ammunition soon. They had to. But humanity had been preparing for 2 months. Every factory on Earth had produced nothing but weapons and ammunition. Every resource had been directed toward this moment. The fire did not slacken. If anything, it intensified as orbital platforms that survived the initial engagement added their weapons to the barrage. The Krell fleet, which had seemed invincible days ago, was being systematically destroyed. Admiral Kane watched the tactical display with iron composure. His plan was working, but the cost was staggering. Platform after platform winked out as Krell return fire found targets. Ships that had fought across the solar system died defending their home. Brave sailors and soldiers gave their lives with every passing minute. Kane felt each loss like a physical blow. These were his people dying on his orders. The weight of command had never felt heavier. Captain Jake Sullivan was still alive, though the Valiant was barely functional. His ship had been hit repeatedly during the running battle from the asteroid belt to Earth. Main power was failing. Half his weapons were offline. His crew was down to a third strength. But Sullivan kept fighting because that was what humans did. When the Krell dreadnought loomed ahead, targeting what remained of Platform 3, Sullivan made his decision. He ordered all remaining crew to evacuate pods. His executive officer, Commander Linda Martinez, refused to leave. So did the handful of bridge crew still alive. They all knew what Sullivan planned. The captain pointed the Valiant directly at the Krell dreadnought and pushed the engines to maximum. The damaged ship accelerated toward the massive enemy vessel. The Krell tried to shoot the Valiant down, but Sullivan's pilot made the ship dance through the incoming fire. The distance closed rapidly. At the last second, Sullivan activated the ship's self-destruct. The Valiant's reactor went critical and the ship transformed into a miniature star. The explosion engulfed the Krell dreadnought completely. When the light faded, both ships were gone. Sullivan and his crew died, but they took a capital ship and 500 Krell warriors with them. Their sacrifice saved Platform 3 and the 800 personnel aboard it. Similar acts of courage played out across the battle space. Sergeant Kyle Brooks held a boarding point single-handedly for 20 minutes after his entire squad was killed. He died with an empty rifle and 14 Krell bodies around him. Lieutenant Kate Morrison led a successful counterattack that retook a captured section of Platform 9. She saved 200 civilians before Krell reinforcements killed her. Private Danny Scott survived his desperate bayonet charge, though he would never remember how. His actions gave his squad time to seal a breach and trap 50 Krell soldiers in a decompressing section. Colonel Amy Fisher coordinated Marine operations from Earth Command, watching her troops fight and die on a dozen different platforms. Fisher had been a Marine for 20 years. She had lost people before, but never like this, never so many so fast. She kept her voice steady and her orders clear, because that was what her Marines needed. They needed to know someone was in control. Someone had a plan. Fisher gave them that even as her heart broke with each casualty report. On the fourth day of battle, the Krell fleet's advance finally stalled. They had lost too many ships. The defensive fire from Earth remained intense. Most critically, they had not broken human morale. Prakash had expected the defenders to crack, to surrender when facing inevitable defeat. Instead, the humans fought harder as their situation became more desperate. It was irrational. It was magnificent. It was terrifying. Prakash called a council of his surviving captains. The holographic meeting showed fewer than 70 ships remaining from the grand fleet of 200. Many of those were damaged. The fleet's combat effectiveness was less than 30% of original strength. Meanwhile, Earth's defenses, while battered, still functioned. The humans had lost most of their fleet, but their planetary defenses remained strong. To continue the assault would likely cost the rest of the fleet. And even if they won, occupying Earth would be impossible with so few ships. For the first time in his long life, Supreme Overlord Prakash faced defeat. The realization was bitter. He had commanded the most powerful military force in the Dominion's history. He had brought 200 ships against what should have been an inferior enemy, and he was losing. The humans had not won through superior technology or numbers. They had won through sheer, bloody-minded refusal to surrender. Warlord Thraken, commanding one of the surviving ships, offered his opinion. Retreat now and rebuild. The Dominion could return with a larger force. Prakash considered this. Retreat meant admitting failure. It meant showing the entire galaxy that the Krell Dominion could be defeated. Every conquered species would see this and wonder if they too could resist. The political damage would be immense, but continuing the attack meant losing everything. The Grand Fleet would be completely destroyed. The Dominion would be vulnerable to rebellions and external threats. Prakash had not lived 2 centuries by being stupid. He made the hardest decision of his rule. The fleet would withdraw. The Krell Dominion would offer terms for peace. Earth had earned the right to negotiate as equals. Admiral Kane received the Krell communication offer for negotiation with cautious hope. His staff argued about whether it was a trick. Commander Paul Grant analyzed the Krell fleet's position and determined they were genuinely defeated. The enemy simply did not have the strength to continue. Kane decided to accept the offer. Humanity had proven their point. Continuing to fight would only add to the casualty count on both sides. The ceasefire took effect slowly, both sides pulling back from direct engagement. The sudden quiet was eerie after days of constant combat. Sailors and soldiers who had been fighting on adrenaline suddenly collapsed from exhaustion. Medical teams worked frantically to save wounded from both species. The scope of the carnage became clear as the smoke cleared. Hundreds of ships destroyed, thousands of installations damaged or destroyed, tens of thousands dead. Earth had survived, but at terrible cost. Cities on the surface had been evacuated, their populations living in underground shelters. Orbital infrastructure was devastated. The human fleet was reduced to a handful of operational ships. It would take years to rebuild. But humanity had proven something profound. They could stand against the most powerful empire in known space and not just survive, but win. The peace negotiations took place aboard a neutral station in deep space. Admiral Kane represented humanity. Supreme Overlord Vrakash came personally, which indicated how seriously the Krell took the proceedings. The two leaders sat across from each other, studying their former enemy. Vrakash saw a species that reminded him of what the Krell had been millennia ago, before they grew soft with power. Kane saw a warlord who had finally learned that strength alone did not guarantee victory. The terms were hammered out over weeks. The Krell Dominion would withdraw from all conquered territories. Species under Krell control would be granted independence. Reparations would be paid to victims of Krell aggression, particularly the Varen. The Dominion would recognize human sovereignty and would not interfere in Sol system affairs. In exchange, humanity would not seek revenge or continue military operations against Krell space. Some human leaders wanted harsher terms. They wanted the Dominion broken completely.
Kane argued against this.
Humiliating the Krell would ensure future conflict. These terms were tough but allowed the Krell to maintain dignity. More importantly, they established humanity as a power that fought for justice, not conquest. Other species watching these negotiations would remember that distinction. The treaty was signed 4 months after the Battle of Earth. Representatives from dozens of species attended as witnesses. The Varen delegation was led by Tellan, now a commander in their rebuilt military. The Lyrian Confederation sent their highest diplomats. Even species that had remained neutral came to observe. The galaxy was watching humanity closely, trying to understand these strange warriors who fought for others. Dr. Helen Cross had returned from Varus Prime for the signing ceremony. She stood with Admiral Kane as the documents were made official. Helen had spent months building bridges between species. This treaty was the foundation for something larger. She proposed creating a galactic council, a diplomatic body where species could resolve disputes without war. The proposal received immediate support. Earth would take a founding seat, not as conquerors but as protectors. Colonel Fisher attended the ceremony representing all the Marines who had fought and died. She wore her dress,